Hey guys, it's the Friction here, or Tank12, having them call me, I don't really care. Maybe you've been able to deduce in the intro that we're going to be taking a quick look at the M6Y, but if you haven't, today we're going to be taking a look at this vehicle. It's a Tier 9 American heavy tank. It's actually not that old, maybe 1 or 2 years old now, and it has the worst win rate on the North American server for the last 30 days out of all the tier 9 vehicles, at least the non-premium ones. There is actually one tank that is even worse than the M6Y, and it is actually the Object 283, which is quite interesting. But as you can see, 45.56% win rate. The damage per game is insanely low at only 1,010 HP dealt per game, and you can also see that the frags are at 0.46. That is pretty damn bad considering it is a tier 9 heavy tank. So why is this tank so bad? Why do players have such a hard time playing this vehicle? That's going to be the main question for today's video. We're going to go through this vehicle. We're going to talk a little bit about its stock configuration. We're going to talk a little bit about its fully upgraded configuration and why players have such a hard time having good games with this thing. So yeah, let's jump on over right into the games and let's take a little bit of a closer look at the vehicle's equipment and all of the modifications. As you guys know already, we're going to be taking a look at the M6Y. This Tier 9 American heavy tank is a very special little vehicle. It's actually not that little, it's quite tall. I think it looks really interesting. You know, it's personal preference if you like the looks or not, but I think the WoT tanks all look a little bit clownish. The turret itself looks like a very big egg. You have the rounded hull that we are kind of used to from the E4, the E5, and all the other American heavies like the M103. But one of the special features about this tank, the mechanics that they've added into, is the secondary track that runs right in here on the last 4 wheels. This allows you to still move when somebody shoots off your first tracks, but you're going to be very slow. So is all of that worth playing this tank? You know, the mechanic, is that mechanic worth playing the WoT tanks? To be fair, this vehicle has the worst stats out of all the tier 9 heavy tanks, or all of the tier 9 vehicles in the last 30 days. Not just on the North American server, but also on the European server. So there must be something really, really wrong with this vehicle. Because if you have played the M3Y, the tier 8 variant, you will have noticed that this thing performs a lot better. This is a tank that I have had a lot of enjoyment in, that I like to play, and which is actually quite a bit wider, or just seems to be wider. I don't think it is actually wider. The turret obviously is bigger, but overall I think the hull itself it's about the same. Maybe it's a bit taller than the tier 9, but somehow this thing just performs way better with the armor than the tier 9 does. And I think that is already one of the first issues when we're looking at the M6Y. This vehicle has some serious problems with its armor. So let us take a quick look at everything we have on this tank. The stock configuration is not great. I'm not going to be playing the stock configuration, but the issue is just that the stock configuration is not a lot of fun. I can show you guys real fast the turret that we have on the stock configuration. I also have to buy the 90mm gun for that. But the stock configuration on this vehicle is just not a lot of fun. This is the turret that you are going to be playing with. This is the 90mm gun that you are coming from the tier 8 with. It's not an autoloader gun, don't worry, it's still the same gun. Single shot, it's actually okay, I would say it's decent, but as a tier 9 you're going to be running into quite a few problems whenever you're trying to, you know, do some serious damage. Considering the E75 here comes at 530 alpha, but it's still stock, right? The E75 also comes with a 88mm gun or 105. So yeah, your damage output is not going to be all that much different from the Yo when you're in stock. Now, I think this turret, on the other hand, is actually a bit better than the fully upgraded turret, which is funny considering that this is supposed to be the stock turret. But you only have one cupola on top, which is not the case on the upgraded turret. So we're going to go over to the upgraded turret, and I'm going to show you guys one of the main issues with this vehicle when you're playing it in World of Tanks in 2023. You can immediately see that the two cupolas are very, very present. These two cupolas make it very difficult to play this tank effectively in close quarter combat where you're going hull down. You obviously still turn your tank, you still turn your turret, you try to evade the shots, but they are very big targets. And in close quarter combat, a lot of players will be able to hit them. But, you know, sometimes when you have a little bit of good movement, you might be able to get out of a couple of shots. Other than that, the turret at the front, obviously, you're not going to go through the lower part or the upper part because it's angled in a way where most of the shells will just auto-bounce or ricochet. 330 millimeters of frontal turret armor right there. It's pretty strong, but as soon as you have the side profile, it's a very big egg. It's very easy to pen. And also the back part where you have the commander's cupola and the gunner's cupola on the left and the right side, you can see just how big of a target that is. Like, that's a very easy flat surface to shoot at, 102 millimeters. So yeah, not that hard to go through. But let's talk about the armor at the front. And I do have the armor inspector, which is a bit funky looking, but we can work with that. So let's take the armor X-ray. And what you can see right here is that the hull armor, the upper hull armor, is 165 millimeters thick, right? And with 250 millimeters of penetration, which most of the tier 9 vehicles have at this battle rating, or this tier, I'm sorry, coming from War Thunder, you can easily penetrate the upper plate. And even 260 up here, it's not rounded enough. You really have to fire like really at the edges to be able to not go through. And you can just see how easy you can go through the upper plate. So if you don't have any protection in terms of armor or a little rubble, a bit of rubble in front of you, people will just be able to go right through your upper plate. The lower plate, on the other hand, is just as bad. 108 millimeters thickness in certain areas, 114. With a tier 8 vehicle, you'll be able to go right through the lower plate. And the lower plate, if we're being honest, it's actually, I think it's big enough. That target is pretty easy to hit, unless you're trying to shoot the wheels there, like the connection between the tracks and the vehicle. That's where you can get basically crit with no damage. Then you have the turret. As you can see, if you place the turret down and you are looking at something below you, you have easy shots on the cupolas. If you erase the turret, you can shoot right underneath the egg-shaped turret, which makes it very easy to go through. So you have to be a bit cautious with, you know, trying to survive shots that are coming straight at you when you're trying to stay hull down. You also don't want to wiggle too much, because then your turret back here becomes a target. But obviously if you wiggle a little bit, it is pretty hard to go through. But yeah, as you can see, there are enough weak spots on this vehicle to make it less effective and to make it a bit of a difficult vehicle to play effectively. Then you also have the choice between two guns, and to be fair, the 120 millimeter gun that I had equipped right there is not really the gun I would be taking if I would have the choice, or if I would be playing this tank again, because I haven't played it in a while. I would play the 105 millimeter gun, because the 120 millimeter gun is not that great. So let's take a quick look. The 105 millimeter gun, which is called T254, the American British gun, which looks and sounds really weird. You have better pen with the standard AP rounds on the 105mm gun. You have better high explosive anti-tank ammunition on the 105mm gun. You have a little bit worse high explosive damage because of the caliber. You have much better rate of fire, better DPM, better dispersion, better aim time. So everything is better on this gun instead of the alpha damage. Now, a lot of players will probably go for the 120mm gun because it's the top tier gun and it does have better alpha. It's only 400 alpha damage, but that's about what you expect of American heavy tanks. But what you can see is that in the end, you lose the DPM, you have worse dispersion, worse accuracy, worse aim time, worse pen, and it just is a gun that is worse in every single regard except for the alpha damage. And that's where I have to say that the alpha damage is probably not something you want to focus on too much with this vehicle, but that makes it automatically less interesting for all of the players who like heavy tanks to do some serious damage with a single shot, such as the E75, such as the Moisil, which still doesn't have the 530 alpha damage with a single shot. But, you know, when you're playing a tier 9 heavy tank, you want to do more damage than 320 with a 105mm gun. That's not why people are playing the tier 9 heavies. But when you actually have to choose the 105mm gun on a tier 9, which is not the top gun, but which is just better in every single regard, it makes it tough to make this vehicle likable. If you combine all of the other factors, such as bad armor, such as mobility, which is actually decent enough, I would say, but I do have a turbo on it, so do with that what you want. It makes it like a tank that nobody really remembers after playing, and it makes it underwhelming. So what I would do if I was in the shoes of Wargaming, I would improve the 120mm gun, maybe improve the armor on the cupolas a little bit, and then you already have a much better experience. If you do not want to improve the gun all by that much, you know, you could basically improve or decrease the reload time. You could improve the rate of fire with that. You could improve the armor penetration to about 260mm. That would be nice for the AP shell. Have the heat round go to 330mm of penetration. And then go down with the dispersion to 0.35. I think that would be fair. Or you just go up, you leave all of the characteristics down here just as they are, except for maybe average penetration, and then you improve the alpha damage to 440, because that would offset this vehicle and make it a bit something different from the other American vehicles, such as the M103, which also has this 120mm gun. But this 120mm gun, as you can see, has much better average damage, better penetration, better heat rounds, a better rate of fire, better dispersion, better aim time. And that is without a crew on it, right? So basically, why would you play the M6Y? And that's the big issue. That's probably one of the reasons why this is the least liked vehicle, because players are not performing very well with the 120mm gun, which is just subpar. So they are going back to playing the 105mm gun, but the armor layout doesn't allow you to be alive long enough or be effective long enough to do enough damage, so you're getting really bad win rates, because this vehicle is not going to be able to keep on par with the E75 or the Tiger Mouse, which is now the new tier 9 premium vehicle that is out there. So it's a bit difficult. I still like the tank, which is kind of weird. I like playing this vehicle. I'm going to show you guys some gameplay I've had with this tank, how I play it, and how I make it work, or I try to make it work. Because I actually enjoy this vehicle. I enjoy the look of it, I enjoy the play of it, but I've played it with the 120mm gun. So now, with the better performing 105mm gun, I should be doing more damage, and I should be more effective. So let's go over to the gameplay and see what this vehicle can do, how you can improve it, and also equipment is a thing that we probably should talk about, because I haven't really... This is just equipment I've placed on the vehicle that I had lying around, but with proper equipment, it's probably a much better vehicle. So I'm going to show that in the gameplay. I'm going to talk about the equipment, I'm going to try some things out, and then afterwards we can see if it still is this piece of trash that everyone kind of seems to think it is, or if there are a couple of redeeming factors to the vehicle. So, as always, I have two replays ready for you guys. First one is a tier 9, tier 10 matchup, but there are only 4 tier 10 tanks per side, so not all that horrible for us. What I want to put the focus on is the 120mm gun, which I am using in this replay, and then I want to compare it to the 105mm gun in the second replay. This replay is very short because we're not going to survive for a very long time, but I think it shows you just what you can do with this tank, its abilities, but also some of its limitations. And I think the very first thing we probably should talk about is the fact that this is not a slow heavy tank. I am using consumants, that's not even a word, equipment that does improve the mobility of this vehicle. Having the 10 degrees of gun depression is also a very nice feature, as you can see right here, because it allows us to stay hidden behind this very nice mound or little hill of coal. But we're gonna move further forward. We're gonna move to the F2 area to, you know, take the fight to the enemy. There are not a lot of heavy tanks with us. We do have the TNH and the Super Conqueror. There are 2 or 3 TDs in the corner as well, with the Yak Panzer E100 and the Waffenträger of Panzer IVs. So we should have enough coverage, enough cover for us to get into the city, and hopefully if somebody tries to flank us, we get some supporting shots from the hill. But yeah, the vehicle itself is not slow, and I think we also have to address the fact that the vehicle itself is not badly protected. Now we're going to be seeing that in just a moment. Although the armor does say it is particularly weak on the upper plate and the lower plate, the armor does still allow you to bounce occasional shots. And, you know, if you're moving, you're not that easy of a target. What you can see right here is us engaging this object 752. And he is just trying to get another shot into our turret, but he doesn't manage to penetrate there. He actually hits like the turret there. And the turret is by far strong enough to bounce any direct shots if they do not hit the cupola. Hitting the cupola isn't all that easy, especially if you are behind cover. And so far you can see the very first 2-3 minutes of this battle are going very, very well in our favor. We have 2 targets with almost completely knocked out the object 752. There are incoming shots, but these shots are not that terrific or terrible for us. The Amex M451 we were able to track, and so far we are kind of dictating the pace of combat. And the armor is holding up, especially the armor on the turret. As you can see, that Tortoise bounces us, we bounce the object 752, or he misses us. And this is the place where you want to be in the M6Y. This is where you can do a lot of damage, but as I mentioned prior, the gun itself is sadly not as reliable. And one real quick thing I wanted to point out, where we're going to go into the free camera, is you can actually hit the side of the armor right here, which is the hull armor, because it's like it's very clearly visible, because it protrudes very aggressively to the front. So yeah, this is sadly one of the biggest problems of American tanks, because their hull is kind of rounded. These sides here are very easy to pen, and they are very apparent. If you are somewhere over there, and I tried to do the same peek strategy that I did 2-3 times against the Object 752, if you do meet a player who does know that these cheeks are actually pretty easy to pen, you will get quite a bit of damage done to you. So keep that in mind. It's one of the worst qualities of this vehicle. But yeah, as I mentioned, the 120mm gun, sorry, not the 122, it's sadly not very reliable. As you can see right there, we bounced the cupola of the Tortoise with a heat round. The reload time is exceedingly long, I think over 11 seconds by this point in time. And the penetration rate for the heat shells is also only at 300mm. Now the AP shell is even worse with 243. So as you can see, as soon as these people are in front of us, we have a very, very tough time in fighting back effectively, but that is something that would happen to any vehicle that has to go up against 2 vehicles that both have much better DPM than you. But you can see The armor holds up pretty well if you are in the right spot. As soon as you are out of the right spot, you're gonna have a pretty tough time. Mobility-wise, I think the vehicle is doing pretty fairly. It's not too bad. But the gun itself, the 120, is just not the most reliable in my personal experience. We still did about 3,000 damage, so that wasn't all too bad, and in the end we did win this game, even though our city task force did fall. The TDs in the back did do quite a good job afterwards. The armor also was decently effective, but we're going to go over to the second gameplay where we're going up against some tier 8 vehicles and where we use the 105mm gun. That's where we can really see how much better the 105mm gun is, but like the drawbacks or the just what do you call it, the consequences that you have to face with the 105mm gun, how much it's actually going to suck in certain areas where the 120 actually does perform better, and that is mainly to do with the fact that the alpha damage is just not on par. So, the second game is a lot easier in terms of opposition that we're facing, just a few tier 9 vehicles, the same amount of tier 10s, but also some very tasty tier 8s that you can easily take care of when you have a high rate of fire and when you can do a lot of damage in a very short period of time. Now, the 105mm gun is basically better in every single regard compared to the 120mm gun, except for the fact that you lose 80 damage per shot. Now, the average damage of 400, as I mentioned prior, is not good enough for all the drawbacks that you have with the 120mm gun. I would say that if they would improve, depending on the 120mm gun, and also improve the alpha damage to the level of, let's say, about 440, maybe even 460 damage per shot, the 120mm gun would all of a sudden become a much better viable option than the 105. As you can see right here, sadly for us, we do spot a Skoda T27, and when you are in a position where you can use the 10 degrees of gun depression, this vehicle becomes pretty damn effective. This Skoda T27 is playing a bit weirdly though. He's not getting himself into the proper cover, so he just stays there and lets me put two nice shots into him, even though you can see only 320 damage dealt with that first shot, and the other one is 352. But yeah, the armor is not too bad. The armor holds up at a distance, as you can see, but it just sucks. These damage numbers suck if you're playing a heavy tank at tier 9, and that is probably one of the key reasons why players do not like this vehicle. It just sucks when you barely do any damage with a single shot, when there are other vehicles at tier 9 that can do basically almost twice the amount with a single shot, and where their DPM is not that atrocious as the DPM is with the 120mm gun. But yeah, with the 105mm gun, all of a sudden you become a lot more flexible. Now, obviously, that was a bit of a weird shot. We just bounced him because I think we hit the side armor right there when he moved over to the side. Not a very good shot by us, but in the end, the rate of fire with this gun is just much better. The penetration is better as well, as you can see, 251 millimeters of penetration. Better shell velocity, better heat rounds, and better heat round penetration, 350 millimeters instead of 300. Just 50 millimeters more. This is also an area where I would like to see maybe even better heat pen, maybe 330, because then I would deem it to be a bit more fair. But other than that, you have a very accurate gun, a gun that doesn't need a long time to aim in, and a gun that does provide some real big damage over time. Now, that is very important, the overtime part, because your single shot damage is not that great. As you can see, it's now 319 damage to a G-SOR 1010. Yeah, that's certainly not what you are looking for when you're playing a tier 9 heavy tank. But I think I'd much rather play this gun then play the 120mm gun, where I might roll, let's say, about 440 damage with a single shot, but it takes me a whopping 4 or 5 seconds longer to reload. And then the next hit, I'm gonna go below 400 damage, and I shoot someone for 380 or something like that. Yeah, I'd much rather have a better gun that is overall better in every single regard, except for the damage part, and which also gives me better DPM. So yeah, in the end, I think this is the only viable gun for me personally, but I do understand why players choose the 120mm gun, because they want to use the biggest caliber available, because the alpha damage is much more important to them than the high rate of fire, because they might not get a second chance to, you know, deal more damage, and they just want to deal as much damage with a single shot as they can, and then they choose the 120mm gun. Because, you know, as you can see right there, 279 damage, that's what you get when you're using a 105mm gun. That's just very painful. Against a tier 10 vehicle, right? You can see he hit us for 481, and he's gonna hit us again for 499, and we barely do any damage to him. But it's still the better trade-off, in my personal opinion, than the 120mm gun, because at least we were able, or we would be able, to fight back faster, and overall I think it would just allow us to do more damage, and be more reliable, because the alpha damage is not everything, in my personal opinion. But other than that, the armor in close quarter combat can work, but as soon as you are going up against vehicles that are the same tier, or, you know, a tier above you, and when you don't have the cover available, and you have to rely on your armor, this vehicle is not going to be able to do all that much, unless the enemy team plays a really stupid way, and doesn't know the weak spots. They can easily go through the turret or the lower plate, or just the hull in general, without too much hassle. The UDIS right there hits us for almost 500 damage. We hit him for 310, making the damage total now, by this point, 2,970. It took us quite a few more shots than with the 120mm gun in the last round, but generally speaking, I just think that with this gun, we are a much bigger threat. So there comes the Gorilla, and I know that the high explosive damage on this thing isn't the best. It's a 105mm gun, so 420, that's what you basically get with the AP shell on the 120mm gun. Maybe 20 damage more, but the penetration of 53mm is kind of atrocious. It works against vehicles such as the Gorilla right there, but if there were other vehicles with better armor, where maybe high explosive with about 100mm would be enough to go through the side, I think this tank could be a bit more interesting and maybe more special for the American tech tree. But as you can see, the armor does work particularly well at distance. It is maybe a weird tank to shoot at from a distance because the turret is so large, but at the same time, you know, if you just hit the lower plate or the upper plate, we looked at the armor stats. I think if you have 200mm of penetration, you can go through the upper plate, or 230 or 40mm. Not everyone has that at tier 8, so that's where you're going to be bouncing quite a few shots, but at tier 9 and tier 10, that's where the armor protection really wears off quite quickly. But luckily for us, there are some more targets coming up. The game is actually particularly close. Yeah, we do switch over to Heat because we want to be able to penetrate the TNH and the BZ, but the BZ gets killed by the T-54, and now we make our play. Now, since we have great gun depression, since we have a really good reload time, we don't really have to worry too much about the UDIS, what is it called, the UDIS 16 and the TNH together, because we have a very good position where we can hide our turret, and at the same time we have more than enough gun depression to be able to shoot at both of them from this elevated position and not have to worry about a bad reload time because the gun itself is reloading pretty quickly. So yeah, it's not really that much of a problem. We can stay here, be protected, and use our armor effectively in the best possible way. But as you can see, one shot against the TNH TVZ-51 only did 307 damage, while our Panzerkampfwagen 7 captured the enemy base. We were unable to kill the UDA-16. But overall, the vehicle did perform much better than expected. It's a tank that I actually do enjoy playing. A tank that I think is decent enough in capable hands, but I can see why players feel that it's an underwhelming experience, because the guns are just overall not the best. And I think having a reliable gun is probably the most important thing when you're playing a tank. And this tank sadly just has two guns that both don't really fit into the right category. Both of them are good at some things, but they both lack certain specific important details, such as penetration with the 120mm gun, reliable penetration, or they lack reliable damage output, such as having at least 400 alpha damage with a 105mm gun. That is something that is lacking as well. So we're looking at a we're looking at a tank that has two guns. Both of them are just kind of okay, but nothing spectacular. The armor is decent enough if you're using it with a little bit of, I'd say, with a little bit of patience, and especially with distance. But the armor gets pretty quickly devastated up close and against the equal tier opponents. And there are two very big cupolas on top, which are not super easy to hit, but they're still there. So if you have a little bit of aim, you can probably take this tank out, even if it's in a hull down position. So that kind of makes it a bit harder to play. It do have decent enough mobility to get you from point A to B. Rate of fire is decent enough if you're using the 105mm gun, and the gun depression is pretty damn nice. So overall, I think it's not the worst tank, and I don't really see the reason why it has such low win rates, but I understand why it might be performing at a subpar level or below average level, but that it is this bad must have other reasons as well, that the stock configuration might be a bit of a pain to play. I didn't really play too much of the stock configuration because of the premium time, everything I have, so I went through it pretty quickly. But I can imagine that this vehicle being in stock, going up against tier 9s and tier 10s, might just be a pretty damning experience, because you're running around with a 90mm gun. But afterwards, once it's fully upgraded, it's still not the best, but I think you can do fine with it if you give it a little bit of a chance. But yeah, sadly, this is the worst rated vehicle in World of Tanks at tier 9 on the North American and the European server for the last 30 days. And yeah, might need a couple of little buffs. Is not really the most fascinating tank to play either. But yeah, tell me what you think about this tank, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Until then, have a good one.